morning, I'm Pauline Verzosa. It is Friday, the 20th of February, and we're bringing you Morning Matters because your mornings matter. Now let's get to the stories that matter today. House Speaker Bogie D has until March 2 to table the 4 impeachment complaints against Vice President Sara Duterte. Once in the order of business, the House must refer the raps to the Justice Committee within 3 days to formally start the proceedings. Malacanang is dismissing former President Rodrigo Duterte's kidnapping narrative as he attempts to skip next week's confirmation of charges hearing in the Netherlands. Palace Press Officer Claire Castro maintained that the arrest and transfer to The Hague were carried out in strict compliance with Philippine laws and the country's residual obligations to Interpol. And Canlaon volcano remains under alert level 2 after yesterday's moderate explosion produced ash emissions and volcanic flows. Welcome to our program, Morning Matters, where we talk about the issues you need to know for the rest of your day. And now first on the agenda, the 4th impeachment complaint against Vice President Sara Duterte has been transmitted to the office of the House Speaker. Lawyer Nathaniel Cabrera filed the complaint on Wednesday, which was endorsed by House Deputy Speaker Paulo Ortega and Manila 6th District Representative Benny Abante. Among the grounds in Cabrera's complaint include culpable violation of the Constitution, betrayal of public trust, graft and corruption, and bribery and other high crimes. It also included VP Sara's threat against President Bongbong Marcos and her alleged misuse of over 612 million pesos in confidential funds, as well as the affidavit of Duterte's alleged bagman Ramil Madriaga. House Speaker Bogie D now has until March 2 to include Duterte's 4 impeachment complaints in the plenary's order of business. After that, they have 3 session days to refer these to the House Justice Committee for the impeachment proceedings to be deemed initiated. But are congressmen afraid of Sara's retaliation if she wins as president in 2028?
It should be a welcome part also for the vice president because only through a proper impeachment process will they be able to actually present their perspective or present their view or defend themselves for that matter.
Palagay ko naman it would not be good na malaman ng taong bayan na magiging bengador ang ating vice president. For example, ako, tinatakot na rin ako na baka ako balikan kung siya maging Pangulo ng Pilipinas. Well, hindi na po ako natatakot dun . I mean, every public official, kahit ako, should be accountable to the people that elected them.
And in other news, the palace rejected former President Rodrigo Duterte's claim of kidnapping, stressing that his transfer to the International Criminal Court was carried out lawfully. Maricel Halili has this report.
Malacanang pushed back at Rodrigo Duterte's claim that he was forcibly taken so the International Criminal Court can detain him. This was one of the former president's reasons in a signed notification dated February 17 on why he does not want to attend his confirmation of charges hearing set from February 23 to 27. Duterte said he does not recognize the foreign court's jurisdiction over him, as he was kidnapped, pushed into a jet, and brought to The Hague in the Netherlands. He claimed that the so-called kidnapping was facilitated by the office of President Bongbong Marcos. But for Palace Press Officer Undersecretary Claire Castro, the government just acted in accordance with Philippine laws.
Magandang araw. Ayon po sa batas. RA 9851, maliwanag ang sinasabi sa Section 17 na kapag ang isang kaso o isang complaint ay dinidinig na sa isang state o international tribunal or court, maaari pong i-dispense with na ng gobyernong ito ang anumang pag-iimbestiga at hayaang magpatuloy ang pag-iimbestiga sa nasabing state or international tribunal. Meron din pong residual obligation ang administrasyon na ito upang ipatupad ang dating napagkasunduan na nung tayo pa ay miyembro ng ICC o ng Rome Statute.
Castro also brushed aside suggestions that Vice President Sara Duterte's political plans could affect her father's case before the ICC. The VP announced on Wednesday, February 18, that she is running for president in 2028. The palace also denies feeling threatened by Duterte's declaration that it is now exploring common grounds even with known political opponents. This speculation was fueled by a social media post by Naga Mayor Leni Robredo, which showed preparations for the president's visit to her city. Yusek Castro did confirm that Marcos will indeed meet with Robredo on Saturday, February 21st, for a flood mitigation project. The palace press officer, however, downplayed suggestions that the meeting could signal political realignments ahead of the 2028 elections. She likewise brushed off speculations that the administration is courting Robredo. The former VP and the president, of course, were rivals during the 2022 national elections.
Ikaw naman, nagsuot lang ako ng pink pero naagad mali siya. Wala po. Ang kulay na sinuot ko ngayon ay wala pong kaugnayan sa anumang politika. Wala pong anumang update kung nililigawan na sino man dahil ang sabi nga po natin kahapon pa ay wala pa po sa isipan ng Pangulo at ng administrasyon na ito ang patungkol sa pamumulitika o humanap ng sino mang kandidato para sa 2028. Tutok po ng Pangulo ay trabaho. Ayun po, ayusin ang mga issue patungkol sa baha at ang pag-angat po ng ekonomiya ng bansa.
When asked if other matters would be discussed between the two leaders, Castro replied,
Yan ang abangan nyo.
As for the possibility of forging alliances against Duterte in 2028, Castro maintained that no such discussions have taken place. But this crossing party line scenario was further charged by this announcement.
Magkakaroon po ng bagong NBI director sa katuohan po ni Atty. Melvin Matibag.
Castro did not disclose the reason behind Matibag's appointment, but emphasized that the decision was within the president's prerogative. Former Duterte ally Matibag will replace NBI Acting Director Lito Magno.
Una-una, masasabi natin bakit niya in-appoint or i-appoint. Nandun po yung tiwala. Nakitaan po niya ang si Atty. Melvin Matibag ng maaaring pagtiwalaan. Maaaring magtrabaho para sa gobyerno. Pero kung ano yung pinaka-reason, hindi pa po nasasabi sa akin in details.
Matibag was appointed acting cabinet secretary in March 2022, or during the final months of the Duterte administration. He was a known defender of Digong and his family until 2023, when he resigned from his post as Secretary General and later as a member of PDP Laban, the political party that brought Duterte to Malacanang in 2016. For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
Meanwhile, lawmakers and various stakeholders are gathering in Cagayan de Oro City today for a public consultation on the proposed anti-political dynasty measure. And now let's get more on this regarding this consultation from mobile journalist Amy Atienza. Amy, what can we expect today?
Yes, good morning, Pauline. So far, this leg ng Cagayan de Oro City, ito daw yung last na isa-schedule nila na public consultation. Pero balikan lang din natin yung nangyari kahapon sa Cebu City. Marami kasi doon ang pumabor no, na ipasa na ang anti-political dynasty bill. So ang naging difference lang is that itutuloy ba ito sa second degree of consanguinity or fourth degree of consanguinity. Ngayon sa Cagayan de Oro City, pupunta tayo sa University of Science and Technology of Southern Philippines no, para nga tingnan kung same ba yung sentiments nila doon sa mga narinig nating kapatid na Cebuano, no? At yun, abangan natin dahil ito na yung magiging final, and according nga doon sa naging interview natin with Representative Zia Lonto Adyong, medyo oppressed na daw kasi with time, so tigi-isang province per region yun nangyari, no? So isa sa Luzon na nangyari nun sa Carmona, Cavite, isa sa Visayas na nangyari kahapon sa Cebu City, at ngayong last sa Mindanao, no, sa Cagayan de Oro City. At yun nga, titingnan natin kung ano yung magiging sentiments ng mga kasamahan natin doon, no, mga civil members din yan ng civil society organizations, members ng business sectors, maging mga estudyante at guro, dahil nga given na makoconduct siya sa isang university, no, ay abangan natin kung papabor ba sila o tututol sa anti-political dynasty bill.
Amy, pakikwento naman sa amin kung ano yung nangyari kahapon sa consultation sa UP Cebu, ano? Because it wasn't just the residents of Cebu who expressed their support for this bill, but even some of the local officials.
Nakita nga natin, Pauline, no, meron dong members ng local government units, pati si Vice Mayor Thomas Osmeña ay nandun daw, at sinabi niya nga nung bago siya umalis doon sa venue, sinabi niya na sumusuporta siya sa pagpapasa ng anti-political dynasty bill given na siya rin mismo ay miyembro or bahagi nitong political dynasty sa Cebu City. So yun narinig natin na mas maigi nga daw, nagloko pa siya na mas maigi nga, baka pwedeng yung magkakamag-anak ang maglaban-laban sa isang eleksyon, sa isang posisyon. At feeling niya daw sa ganong paraan ay matitigil yung political dynasty. May narinig din tayo na ilang mga locals doon na nagsasuggest sila na dapat din daw tutukan ng Kamara yung succession at saka yung pagiging simultaneous nung paghawak ng posisyon ng mga family members. Dapat daw kasi may mga spaces at hindi inaalaw talaga yung succession mismo ng mga magkakamag-anak doon sa pagdating sa pagkakandidato, no. At may ilan na galing pa actually ng Nueva Ecija, yung nakausap ko, no, Pauline, galing pa siya ng Nueva Ecija at gusto niya nga lang din daw talagang marinig yung sentimiento ng mga Cebuano dahil sa kanilang region or sa kanilang province ay marami rin daw talaga political dynasties. So inaasahan niya nga na dahil din dun sa mga narinig ng sentiments ay maipasa na ng Kamara. And actually dun sa timeline din na naibigay, hopefully daw before Lenten break, Pauline, ay matapos na nga itong discussion ng Kamara pagdating sa anti-political dynasty bill dahil inaasahan din at hopefully daw ay maisama sa State of the Nation address ng Pangulo for this year.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your reporting. That was mobile journalist Amy Atienza reporting from Cagayan de Oro City. Now, don't go away. We will be back with more stories after this break. Keep it here on One News. Good morning and welcome back. I'm Pauline Verzosa, and here on Morning Matters, we talk about the most pressing issues and we give you the context behind the headlines. As we know, President Bongbong Marcos and Naga City Mayor Leni Robredo are scheduled to meet in Naga City. Palace Press Officer Undersecretary Claire Castro confirmed that Marcos will visit Naga on Saturday, February 21. The visit aims to check on the implementation of the government's Contra Baha program, with Robredo joining the inspection. Now, when asked about political discussions or potential alliances, Undersecretary Castro said none had been planned. Well, let's take a look back at the major political developments that shaped the week. Vice President Sara Duterte has formally announced her intention to run for presidency in the 2028 elections, a move that could reshape the country's political landscape and trigger early alliance building across major parties. This comes as a fourth impeachment complaint has been filed against her, further intensifying political tensions. Meanwhile, discussions continue over the possible impact of the International Criminal Court's latest move, naming alleged co-perpetrators in the drug war case linked to former President Rodrigo Duterte. Developments that may carry legal and political consequences for high-profile figures, including two sitting senators. Lawmakers have also begun with consultations on the proposed anti-political dynasty measure, with public hearings held in the regions to gather feedback on regulating political families in government. And in the Senate, new measures were filed, including a proposal to abolish travel tax aimed to boost tourism. Now, with the 2028 elections on the horizon, political realignments are also expected to accelerate in the coming months. And joining us now to unpack this week's major political developments, we have political analyst and UPLB professor Antonio Contreras. Professor, good morning. Good to have you with us here on the show.
Good morning, Pawi.
All right, Professor, well, it was quite an eventful week in the political front, but let's start with perhaps the biggest news this week, and that was the announcement of Vice President Sara Duterte that she will indeed run for the presidency in 2028. Prof, how significant is that early declaration, and what does it signal to the public, to her rivals, and even her allies?
Well, the significance of the announcement is that it was very underwhelming. You know, if you look at the way it was done, the way it was, the speech was delivered, it was obviously lacking some spectacle in it that is expected of an announcement for a candidacy. It's as if it was like a knee-jerk reaction or something. There's no fanfare. So that is what struck me there. Now, of course, we already expected that Sara Duterte will run. And I think what is just surprising is that it was too early to do it.
Well, you did mention that it was lacking spectacle. Do you think that was deliberate on the part of the vice president?
Well, I don't think so. I think they're reacting to something. I think the reason why they announced early is because there were some triggers and there are possibilities why maraming pwedeng maging rason kung bakit. But I think one of those would probably be because, they want to steal the narrative.
Right.
There are two things that are coming in right now. She's going to face the impeachment process in the House of Representatives, and her father is going to face the court in The Hague for the confirmation of charges. And so here they are both passive personalities. They're just on the receiving end. So they need to be in charge. And the best way to spin the narrative is to create a noise. To own something and be the author of it. And I think that this is an attempt to do it.
But Prof, in your opinion, how much of this move would be considered as a defensive strategy, meaning it's meant to project strength amid the impeachment complaints that the vice president is facing, and how much of it is also offensive in a sense that she is setting the tone already as early as now, leading up to 2028?
Well, if it is defensive, if it is offensive, I think the lack of spectacle tells you a lot. If you're going to make if you want to make a dent, then you better make it like it's Big Bang. The fact that it was very lackluster means that, the intention is really just to own a narrative. As to whether it's going to be also a strategy that will shape the way, for example, how the impeachment process will go. Some people are saying the reason why she did it is to scare or threaten the members of the House of Representatives. Now, you have to understand that many members of the House might be opportunists, and I'm sorry to say that. But they are also not stupid to make an early move of moving towards here this early. Remember there are still two budget cycles coming, the 2027 GAA and the 2028 GAA. So to be in the majority, to be at the good side of the administration is still a lot plus now. And besides, it could also backfire. If you're going to threaten the members of the House to side in you in the impeachment, now it could even backfire. It could even galvanize their opposition to you. They want you not to run anymore in 2028, so they might as well mobilize to impeach you and found you guilty.
So this is
that can backfire.
right. So this is definitely a very precarious moment for lawmakers. So you don't see any major political realignments happening anytime soon. Lawmakers should take a more cautious stance right now, Professor?
Oh yeah, because for example, right now there is a supermajority. If you're going to, ditch the supermajority, you're going to the minority. And who are in the minority? These are the Akbayan Bloc and the Makabayan Bloc, and some of the Liberal Party. There is a Rize there, is a liberal, is also very is for Lenny. So you have to understand that this is something that is not strategic to her. The only time that this can really be to her advantage, if there is an overhaul of the entire House, which is a big migration of members of the majority turning to her. I don't see that happening right now. More so that this is 2026. There are, like I said, dalawa pang budget cycle ang papasok, yung pag-deliberate ng budget for 2027, which is not yet an election year, and the 2028 budget, which is an election budget. And members of the House, sabi ko nga, kahit marami dyan ang political butterflies, marami dyan ang mga opportunists, they're also not that stupid that they're going to make a move right now, that it's too early when the leverage is still with Malacanang and the majority.
Okay, so Professor, we're still 2 years away from 2028, but as early as now, tandems are already being floated. Among them is a Sara Duterte and Amy Marcos partnership. What do you make of that tandem?
We can always conjure of tandems right now, from the hilarious to the serious. But the thing that we need to do right now is to think about whether it's going to wash and they're going to win. You have to understand that there is this curse in the Philippine elections that if the first who declare candidacy and usually loses, and the first to top the poll, the surveys also lose. So, yun yung dalawang curse na maaaring harapin ng mga nauunang nagdedeklara. I don't know whether Sara Duterte wants to break that curse and, that jinx. But that's the reality of history, because when you declare early, then the two things, you can either attract people to your side or you can galvanize opposition to you, and that's the second one is more likely, knowing that there are a lot of things that can be said about Sara Duterte. You have to understand that she's saying that she's running because anyway she's being attacked, but you have to understand that she's being attacked, but she's not dodging a lot. She's not responding, she's evading, she's using squid tactics. But now, because of the impeachment process, then she has no choice but to face the evidence and explain. So this time it's going to be a different ball game. Maybe that's the thing that she fears a lot, because when the impeachment process comes and there's a finding of sufficiency and substance, then there will be now unpresentation of evidence even at the level of the committee of the Justice Committee in the House. So lalabas na dun yung mga iniiwasan niyo nung sa hearing. Hindi na siya pwede makapag-tantrum ngayon. Hindi na siya pwede mag-name calling lang ngayon. She has to fight evidence with evidence.
Right. But Professor, going back quickly to that Duterte-Amy Marcos tandem, do you think that Duterte loyalists are willing to embrace another alliance with a Marcos at this stage? And likewise, will the so-called Solid North also rally behind another Duterte?
Well, Pawi, earlier I told you that we are free to conjure of tandems from the hilarious to the serious. So I want to emphasize again the hilarious part of it, because that's how I see this tandem. In fact, people are already making fun of it right now with the hashtag. They call it the Duterte Amy partnership as the Do Me hashtag. So it's kind of twist of words. So
why is it a hilarious tandem for you, Professor?
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's you said it. You pointed that out. It's not. There's so much point there.
Nuances?
The Duterte people will not like that. Will question being partnered with the Marcos, even if it's Jaime. And it could not also ride on the sentiment of the Ilocano vote, because they would see Jaime as betraying the name of the Marcos surname. So it's not a palatable, politically attractive. Tandem, and it's not even going to sell to the feminists, because you have to understand that if you're going to sell it on the issue of both of these are women, then many feminists are arguing that these are two very problematic women. So you have to understand that it's not even going to draw fire from the feminist movement. So I think there are so many flaws and holes in this particular tandem. That's why the only thing that we can. And besides, even Jaime is dismissing it, when Robin Padilla, and it comes from Robin Padilla, and you have to remember that. Robin Padilla was the one who's pushing this. She even said, pasaway si Robin. So even she would think that it's not a serious matter.
Well, Professor, it's no secret that Vice President Sara Duterte is a strong contender, well, at least based on surveys and some of the analysis of experts. But the next question there is, what would it take to beat Sara Duterte in 2028 for the presidency? There are now talks of an alliance possibly forming between the administration, the Marcos administration, and the traditional opposition. There's even that meeting set to take place this weekend between the president and former VP Leni, although they did say, Yusek Castro clarified, walang usapan dyan ng alliance. It's only about the Contra Baja program. But how are you reading that possible alliance there?
When you speak of surveys, Pawi, you have to understand that Sara is getting about 30% of the respondents, 30%, and there's still 70% out there they don't like Sara Duterte. So this is the point. I think the best strategy to defeat Sara is to unify. people, and so the possibility of a Lenny Marcos, alliance, or Marcos that's in Nagturan but BBM can endorse, is something that can be formidable, because and I hope people can, because I see already some of the Lenny loyalists already cringing, and a lot of the Marcos loyalists saying, some horrible things about, again, that particular possibility. But you have to understand that, what is the alternative? It could even be worse. So we keep on hammering the thought that Sara is the strongest, but you have to understand 30% is not strong. That's the other half of the 70%. So we can only make it strong if the 70% will fracture and fragment. So the point is that 70% should unify. So I think that's the best strategy.
Well, former Vice President Leni Robredo already said that she has no plans to run in 2028, but her party mates are trying to convince her to reconsider. Do you think Vice President Leni Robredo could make another run for the presidency, mount a formidable campaign, and what should she do differently from 2022?
Well, I think the point is Leni has matured as a politician right now. And there are many things that have happened since 2022. She would not be the first candidate, if ever she runs, who first said no and then changed their minds. We have so many people like that. Even Rodrigo Duterte did that, before. He said he was not going to run, and he ran. So I think the point that will make Leni stronger is that the context is different. The person may be the same, change a bit, but it's the different context. Some people see this election as existential. It is an existential threat to the republic. So I think that is something that needs to be the issue of the China threat, the issue of the corruption and the flood control anomalies. There are new elements that need to be considered, because that the political landscape has become more perilous if we make the wrong decision in 2028.
Well, a lot of things can still happen leading up to 2028, but for now, we're going to have to leave that conversation there. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us this morning. That was Professor Antonio Contreras from the University of the Philippines.
Thank you.
Now, do stay tuned. Morning Matters will be back after this short break. Keep it here. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Matters here on One News. Retired Supreme Court justices are raising serious concerns over the Supreme Court's impeachment ruling on Vice President Sara Duterte. And mobile journalist Arles de los Santos has that report.
Very inconsistent and very shop suey. That is how retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Antonio Carpio has described the Supreme Court's ruling on the impeachment complaint against Vice President Sara Duterte nearly a month after the decision was handed down. Speaking at the forum held at the University of the Philippines College of Law, Carpio pointed out the disconnect in SC's July 2025 decision, which stated that Congress did not violate the prescribed session days under its own rules of impeachment. However, in its final and executory ruling dated January 28, 2026, the court shifted its position, saying that the House had exceeded on the 10 calendar days while in session, acting on the first 3 impeachment complaints against Vice President Sara Duterte.
This concept of a session day as a calendar day where there are plenary session was never a legal concept before January 28, 2026. Not in the US. No court ever said that. No legislature ever adopted that rule. So it's a totally new concept.
Retired Associate Justice Adolfo Azcuna, who authored Article 11 of the 1987 Constitution, echoed this view. He said that the Supreme Court justices themselves are impeachable officials and should not be making rules for themselves.
That would be violation of due process and violation of fairness. So for them to make guidelines on the procedure for impeachment is, I think, beyond the scope of their powers, because precisely they are impeachable officials.
Carpio and Ascuna also cited what they describe as serious constitutional infirmities and fatal errors in the SC's earlier decision, particularly its claim that there was no plenary vote by 1/3 or a majority of House members, despite evidence from the official House Journal and live stream showing that a vote had taken place. The forum also raised concern over the perceived decline in oral arguments being conducted by the Supreme Court in major cases, including the recent impeachment complaint. For her part, UP College of Law Dean Gwen Garcia de Vera said certain portions of the ruling were problematic, citing differences in tone and language within the decision itself. Despite the public's prevailing sentiment on the unconstitutionality of the impeachment complaint against Vice President Sara Duterte, Justice Ascuna reiterated that impeachment remains doable for all impeachable officials, provided that the technical requirements set out in the court's ruling are followed, particularly due process, which includes furnishing all members of Congress with copies of the complaint and supporting evidence. The decision added it did not absolve Duterte of any of her alleged wrongdoings and charges and is currently facing 4 new impeachment complaints after the lapse of the 1-year bar rule. Kapatid Arles de los Santos, we are One News.
And with us now on the show is former Supreme Court Associate Justice Antonio Carpio himself. Justice, good morning and thank you for being here. Justice, I think you're on mute, so if we can just unmute ourselves.
Yeah. Sorry.
There you go. Good morning,
yes.
Justice.
Good morning and good morning to our viewers.
All right. Well, that was a very, very interesting discussion during your forum yesterday at the University of the Philippines. You were one of the panelists, Justice, and you did point out the glaring inconsistencies in the Supreme Court's ruling in both their resolutions, from the definition of session days to that requirement of an administrative hearing for the second mode of impeachment. I wanted to ask you, Justice, how serious and problematic are inconsistencies like these in the rulings of the Supreme Court?
Well, first of all, in the original decision of the court of July 25, 2025, the court added several requirements on the second mode of impeachment, including the holding of an administrative hearing by the plenary. And the Supreme Court in this new resolution walked back all of that. In this new resolution, the Supreme Court restored the practice procedure before the July 25, 2025 ruling with respect to the second mode, the direct filing, the express lane. So we're back to the original position before the July 25, 2025 ruling. So that's safe already. The second mode, the direct filing, where 1/3 of the members of the House or more can sign and under oath the articles of impeachment, and the articles of impeachment will immediately be transmitted to the Senate. And this new resolution says that. Nevertheless, whatever it may be, once there are at least 1/3 of the members of the House signing the articles of impeachment, the same shall be transmitted immediately to the Senate. So we're back to the original, and I'm happy that the Supreme Court has adopted that. Our problem is on the first mode, on the session days, because in the first mode, you have a requirement that the impeachment complaint should be included in the order of business within 10 session days, and then referred to the Committee on Justice within 3 session days after it's included in the order of business. So in the original decision, the court said the House applied correctly. There was no breach of the 10 session day rule under the Constitution, but they were unanimous on that. But in this new ruling, they completely turned around and said there was a breach. And they said that session day should not be interpreted in the way that it has always been interpreted before in the U.S. Congress, in the U.S. states, and even in all our Congresses since the 1935 Constitution. It should be interpreted differently now, That session day means calendar day where there are plenary sessions of the House. There is no such rule wherever in the world that session days are calendar days where there are session, because the purpose of a session day is to stop the clock. Because if the deadline is today to pass the annual budget, and it's the last session day, what the House will do, or Congress will do, is to stop the clock by saying we go on recess or we suspend the proceedings and meet tomorrow to resume. So that is considered one session day instead of 2 calendar days. So, but the court said that is not the interpretation that should be applied to the Constitution. They invented a new definition, and we're stuck with that now because the ruling of the Supreme Court is final and binding on all of us, and we have to live with it. So now, as of today, what will govern the pending impeachment complaints in the House will be the new definition of session day as calendar days where there are sessions. And the first impeachment complaint filed against VP Sara will reach that point this coming Monday. It will be, I am told, that it will, by Monday of next week, the 10 calendar days where there are sessions will have been reached. So the impeachment complaint against Sara will be deemed initiated under the new ruling. It's deemed initiated if the House does not act on it by Monday. So then that means the Committee on Justice will determine the sufficiency of form and substance of the first impeachment complaint. That is the status now. Thank you.
Well, Justice Carpio, as you mentioned and pointed out, the Supreme Court seemingly walked back on its own original ruling, and they didn't state any explanations for it. They simply left it at that. But Justice, does the court have an obligation to explicitly acknowledge any factual reversal, or can they simply leave it at that?
Well, they restated the facts in the new resolution. They restated the facts. They said in the old resolution they said there was no plenary vote to transmit it to the Senate. In their statement of facts, now in their statement of facts, they said there was a plenary vote, and they were unanimous in both instances. But we cannot demand the court to explain why it reversed, because it's factual. There was really a vote. That's caught on camera. There was a video, and that's in the House Journal. So that's established. You cannot question it. What you can question is the original decision when they said that there was no plenary vote, when in fact there was a plenary vote as documented in the House Journal and by video.
And I remember yesterday, Justice, you did mention the ruling has become quite chop suey, no, and mismatch. And you also argue that there can be no bad faith if lawmakers simply follow the prevailing interpretation of the rules at that time. So with that said, Justice, can the Supreme Court still argue that there was grave abuse of discretion? I mean, is that constitutionally defensible?
Well, whatever the reality is, the Supreme Court has ruled. And they are supreme even when they are in error. We just have to abide with that and hope that in the next case they will revisit the ruling and reverse themselves. But as now we're bound by that, Congress will have to follow that.
But normally, Justice, when a court creates a new rule, it should apply prospectively, right? But here
That's
the court
correct.
is applying it retroactively. Is that constitutional in itself? Can you walk us, Justice, through the process on when
Yes.
a rule can be applied retroactively?
Well, the general rule is a new ruling should be applied prospectively, especially if it will undo something that's already been done. In other words, if you committed an act on a certain day and that under existing law and jurisprudence, that was a lawful act, and a new law is passed or a new ruling by the Supreme Court is adopted saying that that act is actually illegal, it cannot be made retroactive because you never knew that that it was illegal at the time you committed that act. Everybody thought it was legal. So you cannot, the due process says you cannot be penalized for an act that everybody knew was legal. Even the Supreme Court said it was legal. But later on, the Supreme Court reversed itself and said that act was actually illegal. It cannot be made retroactive because that will violate due process. So that is the doctrine of operative fact. A new ruling that reverses an old must be applied prospectively because it will violate due process. But in this case, the Supreme Court said we are retroacting it to February 5 when the impeachment complaint was sent to the Senate. Why? Because when it was sent to the Senate, it was illegal because there was no plenary vote. Because the rule is you can invoke the doctrine of operative fact if you did not commit an illegal or unlawful act. You are not in bad faith. So the Supreme Court, in its original decision, said the Supreme Court said the House, when it transmitted the fourth complaint, committed an illegal act, an unlawful act. They were in bad faith. So, but in this new ruling, the Supreme Court said they were they were not in. It was not an illegal act. It was not unlawful because there was actual plenary vote. The basis of illegality was the lack of plenary vote, but it turns out there was a plenary vote. So that was erased under this new ruling. But even as it erased it, the Supreme Court still used it to retroact the present ruling that the new definition of 10 calendar days shall be retroacted to February 5 because the House committed that illegality of transmitting it without a plenary vote. But they already said there was a plenary vote.
Right.
They forgot in their own rulings that there was already they already said there was a plenary vote. So whatever it is, we're bound. The Supreme Court, no further pleadings. You cannot discuss this with us anymore. You have to follow it. The Supreme Court is supreme, even if it is wrong. So we have to follow it now.
But Justice Carpio, is there any legal recourse left, or is that it? As you mentioned, the Supreme Court already did say they have denied this motion with finality. But what does that also imply and mean now for the balance of power between legislative and judiciary? And do you think this will set a precedent where the court can now redefine legislative procedures?
Well, that's why in the next case, we have to bring it up again. Because this is a peculiar circumstance because of the situation of Sara Duterte. But let us assume now there is a new impeachment complaint against VP Sara. They will apply the 10 session days as newly defined by the court. And that will expire on Monday. So if the House does not do anything, it automatically goes to the Committee on Justice. And Sara Duterte cannot raise any issue against that because it's in the new ruling. So that will be the new normal now. She has to face this new impeachment because this is pursuant to this new ruling.
Okay.
And I don't think anyone would stop that because we want the process to continue. And we cannot change that anymore because the ruling of the Supreme Court is final. So that will be the procedure, the practice that will be followed from now on until otherwise reversed by the Supreme Court.
But also at the end of the day, Justice, an impeachment process is a political game. It's a numbers game, as they say. How do you think the recent announcement of Vice President Sara Duterte that she will run for presidency in 2028 will affect the impeachment proceedings at the House?
Well, actually, the message she's sending is, I am leading the polls. I have, depending on whom you talk to, 30 to 40% of the people will vote for me. So if you impeach me and there is no, the numbers, they don't have the numbers in the Senate, so I will be acquitted. and I will become president, and you watch out, because I will remember who voted against me in this impeachment. That is the message. That's why she declared her candidacy.
But how precarious is this moment for the lawmakers themselves?
Well, everything is now clarified because of this ruling. Whether we agree with that or not, we have to follow that. So by Monday, whether you like it or not, because the Supreme Court in this ruling said it is mandatory for the House plenary to refer the impeachment complaint to the Committee on Justice. So it's really mandatory. They don't have a choice. By Monday, it has to be referred. Whether they do not act on it or not, it is considered initiated already by Monday. So it's there now in the House Committee by Monday, Committee on Justice. And the first thing that the committee will do is to determine whether it's sufficient in form. And if sufficient in form, they will determine whether it's sufficient in substance, and then call a hearing. VP Sara will have to file a comment, and there will be a hearing. She will have to present her evidence, and the complainant will present his or their evidence, and there will be a ruling within 6 session days, which is now newly defined. Within 60 session days, which is now newly defined, and there will be a vote in the House. And if there is still 1/3 voting, then the articles of impeachment will be transmitted to the Senate. The problem will be in the Senate.
All right, well, we're going to leave that there. Thank you very much, as always, Justice Carpio, for helping us understand all the legal intricacies when it comes to our justice system. Thank you very much for your insight. That was former Supreme Court Associate Justice Antonio Carpio.
Thank you also. Thank you to our viewers.
Now, don't go away. We still have more matters to discuss right after this break. Keep it here. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Matters here on One News. A moderately explosive eruption occurred at the summit crater of Canlaon volcano on Thursday afternoon. PVOC said the eruption lasted about 2 minutes and produced a dark gray plume that rose roughly 2,000 meters above the crater before drifting southwest. Pyroclastic density currents were also observed descending the southern and southwestern slopes within 1 kilometer of the summit. In an interview with The Big Story, PVOC's Volcano Monitoring and Eruption Prediction Division Chief Mariton Bornas said the current activity indicates sustained instability beneath the volcano, which could continue for years. Alert Level 2 remains in effect at the volcano, and entry into the 4-kilometer permanent danger zone is strictly prohibited.
We've had several of these moderately explosive eruptions since the first one in June 3, 2024. And this is part of a long-term period of unrest of Canlaon, which we think might culminate in a major eruption of the volcanoes.
And in other news, Pasig City Mayor Vico Soto has filed a complaint before the COMELEC against former mayoral candidate and contractor Sara Diskaya. He alleges overspending and perjury in their 2025 campaign. Soto said Diskaya's statement of contributions and expenditures, or SOSE, declared only 895,000 pesos in spending. Now, that's only for all printed materials, with no costs reported for video ads, billboards, nor rallies. He also argued that if properly valued, the undeclared expenses could have exceeded her legal spending cap of about 1.4 million pesos, which is a possible violation of the election law. The mayor is also seeking a perjury case, saying the SOSE was executed under oath.
Tingin ko ito naman yung tamang timing. Before elections, ayoko talaga mag-file, baka sabihin politically motivated, kung before elections ko ginawa. Sa totoo, ayoko na rin gawin to, no? Kasi nakakaabala din. Pero sa atin kasi, ang gusto natin, pag sa lungsod Pasig, kailangan sumunod ka sa batas. Kailangan sumunod ka sa election law. Kung sinabing kailangan mo i-declare lahat ng gastusin mo, dapat i-declare mo ng maayos.
And now it's time to shift gears to sports. Here's a look at the latest action in the Premier Volleyball League All-Filipino Conference. The Galleries Tower pulled off the biggest upset in franchise history after stunning erstwhile unbeaten Next Led in just 4 sets. Rookie Erica Deloria continued her strong showing with 16 points, matching Rosel Baliton, who anchored the defense with 7 blocks. Meanwhile, PLDT leaned on a balanced attack to defeat the winless Akari. Savvy Davison led the high-speed hitters with 18 points, while 5 PLDT players also scored in double figures to stay unbeaten in 3 games. And that wraps up today's episode of Morning Matters this Friday. We hope we've given you just the right start to your morning. Let's make the day matter. I'm Pauline Verzosa. Kapatid, we are One News, all sides, all the time.